able to be here have asked about it, so we want to make it available, and the stories and the information that we share. And so it's exciting to have you all here this evening, and hopefully you enjoyed the food, and thank you for those that prepared it and cooked it. I know Brody and Sally and everyone else that brought the sides and the dessert, and we all may be in a coma, but we'll do all right. We'll have some interesting things to keep it, stories to keep things interesting, I'm sure, and we want everybody to be involved. That's why we tried to invite and include as many as we could for the community and what happened in this area that the church is in the community from back when the original, if you walk in the classroom, the banner that was in there from 1919, is that right? 1909. So that is how far back the roots of the church go. And but then even within the community, because again, it wasn't just in one place as they were around. But I thought I would start, and first I want to read Dorothy Erickson, who wasn't feeling well and had a thing. She was going to come and be a part of this, and actually we had gone to a meeting that the Genealogical Society had done, and she asked Warren, Barbara, and myself to go, and we met with them, and it kind of maybe inspired this, and some asked if they wanted to do this here. And but she wasn't able to be here because she's not feeling well, so lift her up in your prayers if you would. But I'll just kind of read I'll just read what she wrote. It's not too long. So she says, I serve on the program committee for the Northwest Oklahoma Genealogy Society. Several of us had in the past had great results researching church records. We decided to have this program which would give genealogists another research source. And then she gives an example from her personal experience of finding information from church records. And she says, while doing our John T. Jones research, when I first pulled his name up on Ancestry.com, I found that thousands of John T. Jones existed. Family stories were that John T. was a circuit rider preacher who preached in Arkansas and Parker County, Texas. After lots of failed research, a librarian told me I should try tracing down his church records. And they knew that he was a missionary Baptist preacher, so he started looking at the Parker County Church and was told they did not have those records and should contact the district office. And she did that, got a bunch of information from the district office about this John T. And they found out that he was, his father had been a missionary and had a circuit rider preacher in the Cherokee Nation and in the Indian Territory, and also learned that John T. performed the wedding of his daughter in the Parker County, Texas. And then she goes on to talk more about this would be her great-grandparent, I think. I'm trying to think of the connection here. But goes on to talk about it and how he was a preacher, and again, the importance of the heritage, and that they were able to find out the information through church records. And but probably many of you have had to do that or have done that through and found out information that maybe you didn't know through records that churches have. And we're blessed here to have people that keep a lot of records and a lot of information. And but it is important and to keep it. And that's why we were recording, of course, so that we can continue to have it and get things written down, get things on paper. And I did for an assignment for one of my classes, I had to do a church history, and so I have copies of those that, and I've asked people to critique it, add to it, correct what I might have got wrong, but with the information I was able to put together, and several have done that. And so I want to make something that continues on, that we can keep here at the church and continue to add to it. so that hopefully it's in a place where it never gets lost. And but within that we can add the information of the community, the stories that you all have, from your childhood, your parents, your grandparents, whoever it may be, and we can get it written down and carry it on and share it. But real briefly, I mean, some of you, I don't know how many of you know really how the Wesleyan Church came about, but it originally was started from Wesleyan Methodist, which broke off during the Civil War because over the issue of slavery. And through that time, in this church, the old building was actually part of the Wesleyan Methodist. And then in 1968, they merged with the Pilgrim Holiness Church. And that's where we became the Wesleyan. We took on the Wesleyan Church name. And I bring that up only because some of that, even that during that time, affected people like Barbara, because the school you went to, Miltonvale, they ended up shutting it down. And of course it ended up, now Oklahoma Wesleyan there in Bartlesville. But so it's interesting how the ties still come to the community, even though through that history and the change that the church went through. And but I grew up in the church. My dad used to be the pastor in Alva back in the late 90s, I think it was. Is that right? Something like that. And he's in Enid now, but this is all I've known. And so to see the history, and especially see it here in the community, the history of the church, the history of the community, and how it all ties together, it's fascinating to me. And to hear the stories of which we'll hear from Warren and Barbara, and hopefully from many of you out here. And so with that, I'll just, whichever one, Barbara or Warren, want to go first. And yes, ma'am.
The Wesleyan Church in this community was not the first church.
Uh-uh.
My husband's grandparents moved here in 1902, and they were Baptists. And so they started a church up at what they call Gamut, and it was Baptist.
Oh, okay. Well, see, we've already learned something.
That's great.
So,
Gamut is right across north of the firehouse.
okay.
It was a post office and a store and a church and a school.
Well,
Just north across the road from the firehouse, just about 100 yards north there. Remember, Margaret Gamut was a music teacher. She had polio. She was in a wheelchair, and a lot of kids took music lessons, piano lessons, from her in Alva. And that's where she grew up.
interesting. That's interesting. Thank you. So, good start here. But
You want to start with the
Oh.
mine support, the
Yeah.
later date. You wanna-
Okay. Well, I just happen to have some pictures of some of the old timers. See the old boy on this side over here is Scott Cummins, the Pilgrim Bard, come from Wichita down north of Hartner, about 6 mile, and opened up the Last Chance Saloon. And that's where the people going into Indian Territory, that was their last chance for a meal, room, whiskey, and then you cross the line in the Indian Territory. Then he traveled over that area picking up buffalo bones in his wagon and hauled them to Wichita and sold them for the fertilizer business. Then he moved east of Winchester store, half, 3/4 mile, and 3/4 mile back to the south. And the place is still there, and that's the old Scott Cummins place. He is a author of poetry, The Pilgrim Bard. I have one of his books that I bought, one of the originals, and it cost me $350. You can still find them reprinted, but this is original, and he had signed it, and I'm thrilled to have that. I don't have it with me tonight, but here is Twilight, what's that word?
Reveries.
Reveries by Scott Cummins, The Pilgrim Bard. And this is just a little book of poetry, and there's 100 and some pages, no, 100 pages of poems and a few pictures of him. Then his son, Dewey Cummins, and my father were good friends. And Dewey and Sylvia, his wife, would live there. They would go to Alva once a week on Fridays. We would walk from our house a mile east and go to school to the Y, a mile, 2 miles south to Green Lake. And Dewey and Sylvia would come by about 4:15 on Friday, and they'd usually give us a ride for 2 miles to the Y, so we had a mile to walk then. And we thought that was pretty neat. But very seldom did you see a car go by, you know. People just didn't go back then. That was in the late 40s, long in there. But then Dewey moved to Oregon and on to Canada, northern Canada, Yellowstone Territory, east of Alaska. And then we gave my parents, for their 50th anniversary, a flight to go visit Dewey. And it was a highlight of their life. The other guy on there, Verlin White. Everybody probably knew Verlin. Don and Verlin. Don lived a mile, 3/4 mile west. Verlin lived about 4 miles northwest. And Verlin played the violin, and he loved to play it. Don played the piano, but you never heard much of Don's playing. But Verlin would go to the dances on Saturday night and play his violin at the dances, and then come to church on Sunday. And one of the older ladies in the church kind of balked a little bit. Said, "Don't let him in with his violin in the church." Said, "It's got the devil in it." And Verlin says, "No, I played the devil out of it last night." So he'd play him on Sunday, you know. But that was Verlin. And at his funeral, he had his horse out there. And that horse stood out there beside and behind all during that funeral, and was just, you know, like a perfect horse ought to be.
At Don's funeral, they had a recording of him playing the hymn.
Yes, that was pretty neat. So that's just some of the characters we had around here. This character was probably on here too somewhere. I don't recognize him. But just this week, they have been doing a lot of research on the Indian Trail, the trail the Indians come from Fort Canton, Cantonment, Cantonian, something like that. Canton anyway, trying to get back to South Dakota, western South Dakota. And that was the last Indians that come through, and that was the last Indian scrimmage they had. It happens to be about 6 miles that way, because I was right up there about 3 months ago, and I could see the church from where we were up there. But Kiowa was the end of the rail line before they took it on to Hartner. So they would load wagons, and this come out of the book, Kiowa book, that they would load wagons and send them to Fort Supply. That was about a 70-mile trip, and it was right on this ridge up here. And when I was farming that field up there, I'd be running my old 4020 John Deere, and all of a sudden, I couldn't get it to go. It just pulled down, killed the engine. I'd have to shift down 2 gears to get it to go a ways through there. The ground was so hard, I couldn't figure out what in the world was wrong with it. Then they put a booster station up there, and the guy that did the dozer work to level it off for that booster station said, "What in the world is wrong with that ground up there? I can't hardly push it. I've got to shift down every time." Then he had his grader out there leveling it, and he ruined a tire of a grader picking up a piece of iron that was buried in that area, in that ridge. That's about the time the light bulb finally come on. That is the trail where they took the wagons. 3/4 of the wagons were pulled by oxen or steers, and they was taking freight, go to Fort Supply, and a lot of it would go on down into the Texas Panhandle. They'd go around north to keep away from the area south, so the Indians wouldn't say, "We want part of your load for you crossing our land." So they was skipping the Indian where the Indians were. But anyway, when those Indians from the south crossed the trail, that's where they had the last Indian battle in Oklahoma. Can't even think of the name of it now. Pardon? Turkey Springs battle. And they've got people out there now, and they were so excited. They're finding lots of empty cartridges, spent cartridges, and they're the right date and everything else for that battle time. And they hope to have a kind of a little park where you can go through on Highway 64 somewhere about 5 miles south of there, where they can go in and read all about the last battle in Oklahoma. And it will be around. I mean, they'll have it done someday, because they're working at it pretty hard right now. I got to meet with a author, a full Indian man that grew up in Hot Springs, South Dakota, and he has written several books, and he's a very interesting guy, and he is one of them that is helping research the whole project. But you'll find out within a year or two probably exactly where that battle is, because they're marking everything and trying to put it all together. I can't remember the total killed. I think there were 2 or 3 cavalry killed and 2 or 3 Indians, somewhere around there. And the cavalry lost the battle. The Indians outsmarted them, got away, and the cavalry was court-martialed. The people were letting the Indians get away, and it went through the courts, and they have all those records. So it's quite a deal back in, I have it written somewhere, 76 or 1876, long in there. Whoa, I don't know. Cheyenne? Northern Cheyenne, yeah. Thank you. Yes.
I wanted to say something else about this trail. You know where Cedar Grove is. You go down over the
And my dad got interested in that, and he got maps, and then he'd go through and talk to people, and they'd try to show him where the trail was, and he followed it on to freedom, and then from then on, he didn't pursue it much, but he went from Kiowa to freedom, and that, yes, and that map is in the Oklahoma or Alba's Chamber of Commerce built. No, they've moved it up the museum now, haven't they? I believe. But that's some of the early history around here. And one of the people that made some of the early history, well, there's two of them. This little guy here is my granddad, Fred Hayda. There were a bunch of Hayda boys. They were all born in Hungary. Fred was the only one born in the U.S., born at Medicine Lodge the night they had a big flood that drowned several people in 1883 or 4. And their house was on Elm Creek, and they said there was water in the house while he was being born. They ranched southwest of Medicine Lodge. Two of the boys heard about all the grass down in Indian Territory. They rode down and come back, said the grass was as high in places that would hit the belly of their horse. Now that's probably a little blue stem and switch and those kind of grasses because they're about that high. And the grandpa says, "Oh, you guys got too much whiskey. It couldn't be that good." So he went down, checked it out, and he come running into the yard, "Round up the cattle, we're going to Oklahoma," in 1884. And they settled east of Greenleaf School a mile, and back north a quarter, and back east a quarter, and the house is still there. And they had a large family, and there weren't any roads or fences. Grandpa, at 10 years old, this little guy would saddle his horse, that was his job, and ride from there up the Salt Fork River to Kansas, where they had the fences for the 2-mile wide strip of no man's land or something they called it. So people weren't supposed to get down into there. He'd go west from about south of David Wagamont's about a mile and go up on the hills and cut back through, across the little ranch, down the hills, Shoeball Hills, and back into home that night and make sure the cattle were all in that area as a 10-year-old boy. Well, he'd go across right up here 3/4 of a mile, and there was a dug well that some of the people had made because there's a big spring, and it's on my place in this section right here. And he would put his rope on his saddle horn of the horse and let himself down in that well and fill his water jug. And one time the horse wandered off while he was filling his jug. Horse went home pulling the rope. They figured out where he was, went out, got him out of the well. Yeah. One time he said it come up a big old storm, a hailstorm. There weren't any trees then, he said, because the Kansas people had come down and got what trees there were because they needed wood. And the prairie fires burned the area and kept the trees down too. But he said the hail was pretty big, so he took his saddle off, climbed in under his saddle to get out of the hail. Well, the horse ran home, and they had to come get him again. Yeah, he had lots of stories. my grandma in it was '05 or '06, somewhere right along in there, heard about a quarter of land a mile north of here that had never been claimed. And she was a Sutton, her last name was Suttons, and they had settled in west of Hartner, about 6 mile and 3 mile north, somewhere right in there. But Grandma was the oldest one of the family, Clementine, and her 2 boys says, we'll build you a dugout. When they were teenagers, they made Grandma a hole in the dirt and put a top over it, and I think it was just canvas. But she worked in a dress shop in Alva and would ride her horse on Friday evening when she get off work and bring a girlfriend along with her, and they'd both go out and sit out there and sew or whatever, and had to do that on weekends for 2 years, and then the land was hers. Well, Grandpa and 4 or 5 other cowboys heard about those 2 young gals up there, so they decided to go visit them. And they come riding in there, and the other gal grabbed her rifle and started shooting right in front of them. They turned around and left. Grandpa come back a little later by himself. They welcomed 1, but not 5. From that, there was 27 grandkids. This guy right here, that's Gene Moore. And he rode a big horse because he was a big guy. And you can tell that horse is pretty big. And I don't know where I come up with the picture, but, yep. You remember the horse's name? No? That? Yeah, that's Elaine's dad. And I loved going out back in the old days, in the 60s. We would work cattle together. Everybody would take their horse, start on their place. You always had a certain area you were responsible for. Start in that corner of the pasture and bring the cattle to the corral. Be about 6 neighbors doing that. We'd always go to Gene's, get his cattle in. He had Herefords, and they were good cattle. And get them in there and in the corral by 9:30 or so, sort the cows from the calves and start working calves. Gene would ride that old big horse, and
I don't think it was that horse.
probably not wouldn't lasted that long. But he still had a big horse because he's big, and he would flip a rope. They'd put all the calves in a smaller pen. He'd flip a rope out there that just had a steel hook in the end of it. And the guy running the gate would walk in there and flip that hook right around the calves that all force themselves to the other end. So he just flipped that hook around the back 2 legs and hooked that hook up over the rope. And then Gene would turn his horse and away he'd go. And they'd just slide that old calf out there. Well, the kids, younger ones, would run in there and grab the tail and jerk the old calf down sideways. And then you'd just kind of ride it up. Gene would take it right up from Sandy to Eye to the fire. And you had to hold that calf, hold your leg against the back of the back leg and pull the other leg back. And then the other guy would be on the neck. And here'd come a dehorner, vaccinating gun, branding iron, a castrating knife, and an ear marker. There'd be 5 guys working all the way around you, and you didn't want to move too much because, yeah, or worse. But I remember Crozier one time was doing the castrating, and he run the knife in his hand. And so they made him a polis out of cow manure and some salt or something or other, threw in on it, wrapped it up, kept working. But Vernus, then the women would all try to outcook the other one, and the guys kind of liked that. And Vernus was famous for her apple pie, and it was delicious. Years later, I was on the fair board and got to be one of the judges for the pie contest. 3 people, and we didn't know who they voted for, but we all agreed, picked the same pie, and it was Vernus's pie. She won it 3-0. You have the trophy? Yay! Just some of the stories that there are around here.
I want to say that Dad did not learn anything about cattle on his folks' place. He learned that working on ranches because Grandpa, a cow was a cow. It didn't
Yeah.
matter what color she was. So, my grandfather,
Yeah. And what was his first name?
Bill,
Bill Moore. And where did he come from?
Missouri.
Yeah. Uh,
98 when they got him.
98. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, where did Florence Hurley fit into this more?
She was my father's sister.
What I thought.
She was Bill's daughter.
Yeah.
She was my babysitter.
Whoa.
They're our neighbors. Bill,
Bill Hurley and Flo were their neighbors.
Bill Florence Hurley.
Yep. And in case this is being recorded, that was Rob Knight as babysitter. Babysitter, yeah. Now, you
I
want,
remember
there's one.
when my sister got married, Errol and Roger and I, we all 3 had the mumps. And they wouldn't let us into church. So we stood they put a table at the end of the windows. We got on that and looked inside for the wedding and everything. And after the wedding, they run us right back out to Gene and Vernus Moore's car, 'cause that's where we were staying. Till after she left the country, and then we were allowed to go home. She was afraid she'd go get the mumps.
Yeah. They didn't want the bride to have the mumps.
Say your picture's in there on the table. Your wedding picture.
Yeah, Barbara's and Max's.
Oh,
Yep. Okay, Erickson's. Yeah.
He's talking about Gene's work together, Gene. And so I was with Dad one time, and I was really small. And Bernard probably was my Sunday school teacher, maybe, rather more. Anyway, so they all gathered at that morning, and I'm like, I don't know, 3 or 4 or something. She said, "What you gonna do?" And I said, "I'm gonna roast the chickens." He goes, "Well, I don't think that happened, but that's what I did."
Was that the time we had chicken and noodles?
I did want to I told Alan earlier this evening, I went to a program down at Weber Schoolhouse, and I don't know for sure how old I was, but not very old. And during the program, or the thing before or after, they stood up and congratulated Barbara's folks' wedding, and everybody cheered.
What year was that?
38.
38? Yeah.
I was 8 years old.
And that was at Weber.
Yes.
Yep. And Weber School was south of Crozier and Mary Bush's house, just about a quarter to a half mile.
Almost exactly where, the house is.
Uh-huh. Ron Laverne's house. Yep. And that's where Ron and Laverne would go. Ron and Judy would go after school. Ron got a new BB gun, and there were pigeons in the old schoolhouse. And he'd try to shoot pigeons there. Said he never did get one.
The Mungers lived, I think, where the north side of their yard is, and the schoolhouse was just a, short distance
Yeah.
to the south.
I remember the foundation of it, because we farmed that and had to turn around that foundation. Okay, some of the Ericksons have any quick stories? Ellen has something.
I have lots of stories. I can just remember the little community building just east of where we live. And there was a big black stove, I remember in the middle, heated that whole area. And there were so many people in there as kids would play outside until it was time to eat because it was just a big community, big family. It's a family-oriented community. And it still is. There's so much love here. But I don't remember my grandma Edison. She died before I was born. But Jean and Chet and Vernon and all of them were just like my grandpa and grandma. I mean, they were just boys, and my dad was either over at Chet's or Jean's or somewhere all the time. Chet was always needing to help with plumbing. And I remember John Smith, and I forget his last name.
Gladys.
Gladys.
Gladys and John. And I remember getting in a really tiny truck, and I sat on Gladys's lap, and they would come by, and the boys, all of them Smith boys would be in the back, and Russell and Ron and all of them. I don't know how they all fit in the back of that little truck, but we were on our way to Bible school, and I would sit on Gladys's lap. I remember that, and John was just sitting all the way down the road. I was probably wet by the time I was. But I really it was so much fun. Gladys was such a good people. And we would come to Bible school, and we would have arts and crafts underneath the parsonage in the basement. I remember that. And so much fun. We'd sing every morning when we first got there. And one Bible school, we went down on the river and had lunch. Barbara was talking. But everything was so fun back then. I
Yep.
mean, so much fun. But good times.
Yes. That was called Progress Club. What was the name of it?
Happy hour.
Happy Hour Progress Club?
No,
Happy Hour was the ladies' club.
yes. The Progress Club, yes,
Yeah.
yes. That was when Glenn McMurphy was here,
Uh-huh.
and he was trying to have community work together and pull together to the church. And the Progressive Farmer, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, it was published in 1886, and it's still published. And this Progressive had a different meaning then than it does now. But it meant the farmers were to progress and build their buildings and take a lot of pride in their farm is what part of the idea. And they redid their mailboxes. Everybody painted their mailboxes. They made signs for their farms and put them on the farms. And there might be one or two still in the community of their signs. I don't know.
Isn't there one for Lonesome Valley Farm?
They're used for
They're on Calhoun
Calman Hayes, and I don't know if that's is still there. So we have one in the community left. And then, like you were saying about some of the activities the Progress Club did, and they had a county a fair that was just a community fair, and that was one thing they had. It was built on the same idea as the county fair. They had cooking and sewing and all things like this. They had 4th of July picnics. They had, but it was also cooperated with the Extension Club. And that was one thing that Glenn McMurphy especially emphasized, and I talk about him because he was mainly the minister in my growing up years. He came back 3 different times. He didn't learn, did he? But he kept coming back, and 9 years at the first 2 terms that he served for 9 years, and then he left and went to Minnesota and came back and 9 more years, and then later on he filled in for 9 months, I believe. So anyway, he was a big part of us, our years as teenagers. I was thinking also about some of our Sunday school teachers that we had, and I'm going to mention them, and you raise your hand if they were your Sunday school teacher, okay? Stella Mae Little. All right, she taught a lot of people for a lot of years. Elaine and Paul Leswanger.
Yeah, Paul.
Vernis Moore. Maxine Peterson. She was a school teacher, and then she taught Sunday school class here.
She would have left in 1956. Never left.
Okay,
You might say that she's Rollin,
a representative.
mother.
Yes, Roland Peterson's mother, who's representative in Alfalfa County.
Not Wood.
Yes,
He is on the state legislature.
yes.
See, Roland and I were supposed to start school together. We're in the same grade. Well, 2 weeks before we were going to be in the first grade, they moved to Burlington. So
Oh, so,
I was the only one in my grade.
yes.
And Maxine taught at Burlington 31 years and missed 1 day of school in 31 years.
Okay, another teacher, I'm sure a lot of you remember, Geneva May. My girls tell about how much real Bible study they learned from Geneva May. Irene Bush. Ione Hayda, my mother. Clifford Hayda. Dwight Little.
He was
He
Crozier and
yes, he taught in the young.
Class, but I was usually teaching.
Yes. Yes. Marion Gum.
Yeah.
Warren Little, you taught. And I'm teaching still.
Several of us can raise our hand on that one.
yeah.
But at that time, when I was a teenager, Crozier Bush and Marion Gum had a lot of activities for the teenagers, and they were the teacher and the assistant teacher. They had a teenage class which had sometimes as many as 20 students, and that's pretty good for this area when you think about it. They formed a softball group which joined with others in the church later on to play with churches in Alva. Different churches in Alva. This was through the Ministerial Alliance, I think, had a softball group. And at that, they didn't have just teenagers. They had anybody at the church that wanted to play. So we had 70-year-old people, and Rudy Bush with his cowboy boots and cowboy hat. And
The team would move in close because they thought, this'll die, and they thought he wouldn't hit the ball. And they
Yes.
all moved in close, and he hit it way back. Get a run.
But our biggest problem is we never practiced. And because of that, all the other churches just love to play us because they can beat us.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun. And if we'd practiced, we would have gotten really good, I think. So that was some of the things we did. We also met at the Franklin Schoolhouse, which was not Franklin, Faulkner Schoolhouse, which is way out west on top of a hill. It's not there now, but that is where we did a lot of our meetings because we did not have a fellowship hall, and we never had a good place to meet for meals and things. Then after that, after we moved from there, when we did the Progressive Club, we did our meetings out there. And after that, we moved to the Greenleaf School, and we had our Thanksgiving suppers and things like that there. And then from there, when the firemen moved in, it kind of made it a little difficult to have it. And so we did meet sometimes in the basement of the old church, and sometimes had picnics different places. But it was real difficult, and so we're just really thrilled over our new kitchen. Also, I have to mention about our Sunday school class, they decided to make a youth choir. And so we had big attendance that time in those days, but there were a lot of people who lived in the country in those days, so that made a lot of difference because I can think of 3 cars that came to church and we'd have over 20 people, 2 cars had 8 people in, and 1 car had 6 people in, and that would be a good Sunday school class now. But anyway, the church was very full, and so we would have our choir up on the stage, and they would set us up there, and that was a good place for us because we didn't get in trouble on the back row of the church, and so it kept everybody in line, and
And the back row. I remember Glenn Smith and Gerald, they sat on the back row, and they kept these yellow jackets, and they cut the stinger off of them, and then they let them crawl over them during church.
so that's the reason they had to sit in the choir. They couldn't sting you. But anyway, we had the same problem with our choirs. We did it with our ball game. We didn't practice, but we made a joyful noise. The church has meant a lot to me, and it's been a big part of my growing up years. And I'm thankful for everyone who has had a part in our community church.
I want to say the Weber School it was a big deal to have things at Weber, but they did not have a church there. And they didn't, if you belonged to church, you could sing with the group or something, but it was, the reason why they had it was because they showed movies and people would go and see those, and there were some movies that were put out by extension groups. And so people would gather to see that, but they didn't. If they had a program that they were working on at church, they might show it, they might do it at Weber doing, but it was not really connected to the church. But that's why it combined a lot of people, and they knew each other because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Now that was before the war, in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
Yes, and also, I think most of you have heard about when the church began and everything. And Forrest's grandfather donated the land for our church, and John Nelson. And I think that is a good point to bring out. And also, the carpenters on the church, the main carpenter was Sam White and Sam Hayda. Did any of you know them? And my
My Uncle Sam.
yeah, and my uncle F.W. hated too. I think helped, but the people realized the ones who decided they needed a church, which was made from an old church that they tore down and moved here. They decided it was really important to have a church in the community, and so these three carpenters that I mentioned, I don't remember them attending church that much, but the fact that Easter, but they still thought that it was important to have a church in the community.
And that old church that we're talking about was on the McGinnis place originally, and the preacher would live in Alva, circuit rider preacher, saddle up his horse on Sunday, ride to the McGinnis place, have church there, go to Winchester School, have church there, then go to west of Avard or north of Avard to the 7-mile corner west of Alva and a mile south and have church there. He'd be in 3 churches, all by horseback on a Sunday. And we have records of the offerings, and sometimes it would be 85 cents, and the next time it might be $1.25. And, 3 churches, he could get $3, $4, might pay the oats or the gas for the horse.
Not nowadays, would it?
No. Then also on Barbara's place, a mile and a half south of here, is the witness tree. Roger Hayda had a picture of an oak tree, which is still there, and that's been 35 years ago or 40. He sent it to the State Forestry Department. They were wanting to label the trees that witnessed the run, Oklahoma run, and Forestry Department people come out, checked that tree, and at that time they estimated it to be 265 years old. And I got a picture in there of it, and it takes 6 people reaching around it to reach around it. Part of it is dead. It's hollow. It's been hit by lightning. Elmer, Barbara's dad, would tell about the old cowboys that would get under that tree at night. They could see that single tree from all over the country, and that's where they'd get and sleep and just with their bedrolls and their horses, and then go out from there during the day. They come in one evening, and there was an old boy from Kansas had come down and was whacking away at that tree, going to get part of it for wood, and they said they almost had a lynching right then. And that tree is still alive, and it's amazing.
It survived the tornado.
Pardon?
It survived the river tornado.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's hard to get to. The big problem is.
Yeah, it's off the road about a half mile. You've got to walk across the creek and climb a hill, but you can get to it. And we will, and we talked about it, having a Sunday afternoon picnic. Everybody bring their sack lunch, and we go to the witness tree. Yes. And Beverly's classes, when she was a teacher, and a principal would come out. The Haida Hills group, for 17 years they did that, bring about 3 bus loads of 5th graders. Is that right, class? About 4 or 5 teachers and about 4 or 5 parents. They'd stop at my house and we'd talk about rocks. Very interesting. Then we'd go up in the hills. And little Sherman girl one year found an arrow point. And her daddy, her grandpa, was the Methodist preacher in Alva and a Capron earlier.
Hardy.
Darrell Hardy. And he made a box, put velvet on the back, and hooked that arrow point in there and put glass over it and really made it nice for that little girl. And I imagine she still has it, I don't know. But there was lots of kids that did that. And Beverly was there, and I didn't know her from Adam, I guess, hardly. I knew who she was, and that was about it. I think she was the troublemaker of the bunch, but oh, maybe not.
For whatever reason, I was along on one of those trips.
Hey, you may have had a 5th grader then.
Maybe
Yeah?
had 4 of them.
Not all at once, though, huh?
Then for 50 years, minus 1, we'd missed 1 year. We went Christmas caroling, and Judy would play her accordion, and occasionally somebody else would have something or other, and we'd make music and go Christmas caroling and start early in the evening, get in the back of an old truck with a tarp thrown over the top and a little bit of bales of hay and a ladder go out the back. We stopped. Yeah, went in the horse trailer. That worked too. We Christmas carol to Arlie Snary and his wife, Clarine or something like that. Went to their house, nobody in the house. It was dark. Somebody said, hey, there's a little light down there in the barn. So we all went down there, there's about 20 of us probably. And there they was in there milking the old cows, and we sang to them as they were milking.
Sang to the cow.
Yeah. Just one of the unusual experiences. Forrest, did you have anything?
I told me I had 3 minutes. Convinced 119 years. My ancestors came from Denmark in 1901 and eventually settled here. I was born or 1.25 mile north when the church was being built. And the preacher's name was McGraw, and his wife saw the plans, and she said, the entrance is not right. You can't get a casket in there. She was the first funeral. But anyway, the church has always been a very influential, stable place in this community. Held everybody together. Everybody worked together, schooled together. There's people here who didn't go to church, but the church was a very stable part of this community. And I thank the Lord that I was a part of that, and that I hope I still am. But I could go on and on, but that's the kind of my grandmother Nelson wrote about a 40-page life story, and she tells about a lot of things, and they lived up here. She had 8 children, and they had 10 altogether. Had 10 children. But history goes back a ways.
And a little bit of the story about the old church over there. We treated that for termites for years, tried to get it stopped, couldn't get it. We had professional people come out. They said, we can't stop the termite deal. The floor had soft spots in it that there wasn't much underneath. Certain places you step, you'd go down a little ways. So, and it didn't have bathrooms in it. We put bathrooms in it later. But anyway, the ceiling rafters were 2x4 on 24-inch centers. And it went like this, the roof did. So it was time to do something. Max and I decided we would, he was on the board and so was I, and we maybe see if we can get a vote from the people if we should build a new church. And we knew there was several that said, this church has worked good for all these years. Why spend all the money for a new church? And we decided to kind of call a bluff. Said if we get, let's vote on it. If we get one no vote, it's off. We voted, and everybody voted 100% to build a new church. And they said, what are we going to do about the money? Well, again, how about 5 years? If we can get enough money to build a new church in 5 years, then we'll build it. Well, that's about the time the oil boom come through. And we ended up with, I don't know, $450,000 in 5 years to just build a church and have it paid for. So a lot of people say, why build 20 miles from Alva? Why don't you move it down around the edge of Alva somewhere where people can come? I don't know. We just always been here, and it still works.
When they built the original church, it was debt free too.
Yeah, $460 or something like that.
Yeah, I know we still have, I think, the original commitment, if you will, of people to give. And so even the original church didn't have any debt. Not that it was, which I mean, it was a lot back then, but I guess we kind of think, well, that wasn't very much, but it was a lot back then. But even now, it's still,
Yeah.
there's no debt on this one either.
But we couldn't afford a bell.
Could have,
Built a bell tower, but never had a bell in it.
It was just frivolous, I think.
Yeah,
To
looked
buy-
good.
So we have a bell now?
Yes.
We have a bell.
Does anyone else have a comment?
More like you said, we took that to a vote, and being the treasurer of the church, we just left it in the hands of God. And we started with nothing, absolutely nothing, and the money just started coming in, and started coming in. I mean, even from people that didn't live out here, we get money from sometimes in a while. And it was just, this is a true blessing to us out here. There was times afterwards that we didn't know whether we were gonna pay preacher or not, but, here again, the Lord steps in again and helps us out. I know my family's been blessed by this church. I know a lot of people have.
I wonder if there's any count as to how many people have been saved.
How many people what?
Saved.
Oh, that would be a tough one to figure.
I mean, there's old records of some of that, and but probably there's going to be gaps.
Yeah.
And but that would be something to.
A lot of people found the Lord.
Mhm.
Yes.
Well, a lot of people from here are on missionaries and other fields of work, and I know Cody is in Stillwater, right? And, you know, with where does he work at? But of course, he came from here, and in the medical industry there, over there, and many others of Barbara and Alan's family that are missionaries, and so that come from roots, heritage in this church, in this community. So, but,
You know, my family's been,
Mhm.
in a personal, I mean, kind of I talked about my dad being in Alva, and that was when Ron was here, Ron Olson. And of course, it's kind of neat because Dad actually mentored Ron before he got ordained. And then for my wife and Noah and I to be here, just, you know, it's kind of neat to see how things work out. And then, of course, Mom and Dad are, you know, in Enid at Cedar Ridge with Ron. So, you know, again, small world.
And it is still the center of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the only community in Woods County that has a center that is not in a town. Used to be west of Carmen, that little church, and I think they still meet, but they don't have many community projects.
Used to have our box suppers
Yes.
every 2 or 3 months, something like that.
well, all I can remember is my dad saying, you better hurry up or we're gonna be sitting on the front row.
So the front row is always open.
That's why it's still open. Huh?
Latecomer row. I remember putting my shoes on between here and the home and going over those hills about 60 mile an hour to get to church on time.
And we went past their mailbox, and if we beat them, it didn't matter how late either one of us were. If we beat them, we were on time.
Really come down the driveway, you better hurry up.
Around the corner there by the law, and you look for Clifford.
Yeah.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we're frantically combing hair and
And there were 4 ladies that went to Winchester, Mrs. Elmer Williams, Mrs. Fish,
Flora Fish.
Flora Fish, Mrs. Rebel, Lou Rebel, and my grandmother, Clementine Clemmy Ada. Those 4 ladies are the ones that kind of said, hey, it's time we get a church rather than using the old Winchester school.
Who was the other two besides Haida and Rebel?
Flora Fish,
Organized about, I
And
think
May
it was
Williams.
organized in 1930, the
Who
year
was
he was
Fish?
born.
Flora Fish.
huh.
And May Williams.
So you 2 are awful near the same age.
She's older than me.
I don't think he'd had your 92nd birthday yet. And so, he'll catch up with me when he has his birthday.
She said earlier your birthday's this month.
And then in 3 years, says he'll be 92.
Yeah. Mom's got street by about 9 months.
Yep. And that is quite an honor. And you know, both of them still pretty sharp.
Yes.
Anybody else have anything? Now's your chance.
You didn't use your whole 3 minutes. I said, you didn't use your whole 3 minutes.
No.
Why doesn't he tell how many Nelsons actually came to church here? I don't know.
She moved to town in 28. And that was folks went occasionally. Till 1944, and then Dad became a Christian, and we were ready to change.
But didn't your father have some brothers and sisters who lived in this community?
Well, my Uncle Nels owned the land across the street, across the road, and that was about it. The rest of them kind of settled over towards Cherokee.
And that's where the name Cedar Grove come from. Everybody wrote down a name for the church. Across the street was the Nelson. That was Nelson's house, and that was used as a parsonage, and it had cedar trees around it, a grove of cedar trees. So they wrote Cedar Grove.
Wasn't it over there where they had a revival, and that's kind of where they ended up too, also deciding to build the church here?
I really don't know.
I think
Sure
I
don't.
read that somewhere, that through a couple of revivals, and revivalists coming through, kind of, I guess if you want to say, inspired people, probably the four ladies especially, to get things going, get the ball rolling, if you will, and to make things happen. And because it was amazing, because even when they dedicated the original church, it was I've got the name in here that who came down from the Wesleyan Methodist headquarters to dedicate the church building at that time. And he was the head missionary superintendent or whatever, I forget, but I got his name in here. But, it was that, it was important that they even came to a, sometimes we think why would you go to a country church? And, well, even leaders of the denomination or whatever saw the importance of it and would come here. And so that's kind of neat. But the dedication of four ladies means, says a lot, and the importance of seeing the importance of it and the need for it in the community. And you said I think one time you said how many post offices were in the area?
Oh, yeah. There'd have been Little Post Office, Gamut Post Office, Winchester Post Office. Yeah, Faulkner store up on the hill, which was Barbara's husband Max's family, the Faulkners, grandfather. And when you go west in front of Bunk Erickson's house, you make a little curve in the road. The reason for the curve, before the roads were there, he built his store right in the middle of the right-of-way, didn't realizing that's where it was. So they just curved around the store.
And he wouldn't move it. So
He wouldn't move his store. So you still curve there.
How many schools in the area?
Oh, my. Well, every 6 mile, there's school land. There was Greenleaf, Weber, Little, Winchester, Rose Hill right across the river, Franklin, Fairview down, Ferry School out there. Yeah, there were a lot of schools and a lot of kids. Yeah, McKeever, good one.
It's on the highway.
And one time we had 165 people in that building. The basement was full. We had some kind of a contest. But people back then were about this wide.
I want to say I did come to a funeral at the Cedar Grove Church. And that was for Bud Reed that was killed in the battle of, when you go into Italy, what was it called? The
Yeah.
what?
Bulge?
No, that was in Germany.
Oh.
Probably Operation Schwartz, it called it,
Operation Swords?
when they went into Italy.
Well, anyway, he was
probably there then.
The war was over in
Yeah.
45, so it was before that.
As Bud Reed.
Bud Reed was Velma White and Mary White's older brother.
Brother.
No, younger brother.
Younger brother, okay. Well, in 1940, there were 40,000 people in Woods County. In 2000, there were 10,000 people in Woods County. We lost 3/4 of the people in 60 years. And that's hard to imagine. But they were on the farms in 1940, about every quarter section or half section, except out that way, there's quite a ways between houses. But one more story about a Moore, Chet Moore. Great big tall guy, had a voice like this. And one of the neighbors drove by. Chet was out there cutting wheat. So the neighbor stopped, walked out. Chet stopped his combine, and the neighbor said, "Well, Chet, how's the wheat doing?" Chet says, "I don't know. I haven't looked in the bin since yesterday." I got to work cattle for Chet Moore, too, and that was quite something. Bangs vaccinating his cows.
I remember the chant revival meeting. You said it was a-
Yes.
I was listening to it.
Yep.
We also had camp meetings at Weber School.
Yep.
On the school ground. Well attended and
Yeah.
it was quite a pleasure.
And I remember the men picking up the piano, carrying it outside and putting it in the tent, and Reverend Hotchkiss pounding on those keys, and the ivories were just flying off.
We used to have revival 2 weeks.
2-week revival. Anybody else? Very nice. Thank Brody for fixing hamburgers and hot dogs, and all the ladies for doing cooking.
Yes.
Thank you all for being here, and it's a special treat.
And our next get together is November the 17th for a Thanksgiving supper at 6 o'clock if you would like to come.
And you're always welcome. Next spring, we're going to go see the witness tree. Hopefully.
Rain or shine.
Rain or shine.
If you want, I made copies of the information I did for the paper, and I've added some stuff. It's an ongoing process. So if you want some, read it. If you have information or corrections or something to add, let me know, because again, it's a work in progress, and so we can make it as many volumes as we want. So you're welcome to it. But again, thank you all for coming.
I got one more quick thing. Beverly, come up with this and this. These are collector's deals. This says 1923. Scott Cummins has his signature in it. This one is Marjorie Munson on Munson's Hatchery. Has written poetry in there. And how many of you know where Lindsborg, Kansas is? North of McPherson. It is a Swedish community, and there's an artist there that his artwork, I've seen some of it for $17,000, and that was years ago. And his name is Lester Raymer. He grew up by Avard, and he would go to the city dump and find things in the dump that he could fix. And that was way back when. He's been dead for years. He went up there as an art teacher at Lindsborg College, they have a museum there now with some of his paintings, and he started out making wood, what do they call them? Yeah. Well, he just carved in the wood and then inked it. And there's a bunch of them in this book.
One of his paintings hangs in the entryway at Runnemede,
Yeah,
hanging at the courthouse, it's against the silhouette.
yep. And that's pretty valuable. Any idea of value of it? Yeah. And in here is Colonel Bob Kirkbride's signature, 1944. Illustrations by Lester Raymer. About every other page is some of his prints he's made. Castle on the Hill, and, you know, that's quite a deal. You know, there's old Bob Kirkbride right there that he's made a print. They'd love to have that in his museum, I know. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Barbara and Warren, for sharing as well, and the rest of you.
Do we have disclaimers? Oh, well, I told Beverly when we got married, I said, half of what I say is probably not true, but you got to decide which half.